Donald Trump, self-made billionaire. But is the legend a lie? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle now, and Bill does not know what I'm about to ask him, but he certainly couldn't have missed the blockbuster report in the New York Times early this week that indicates that President Trump was part of a family of Trumps that took every advantage they possibly could of the nation's tax laws, and, according to some reports, may have gone beyond the advantages provided by the law. Bill, it's about a 30,000 word story. I'm just guesstimating. I read the whole stinking thing and I watched the video packages that came with the story. But the upshot is this, and it seems like the main critique is this, Bill. Donald Trump is not the self-made man he claims to be. He got a lot more help than just $1 million loan from his dad, Fred Trump Sr. And in fact, for years, from starting at about age 3, he's been on Fred Trump's dole, leading up into his 40s and 50s. He was being advantaged by that. I'll get to some more specifics about that, but let me just take that part of it right there. Is this something that the market has already priced in, that Donald Trump, when he was campaigning for president, was somewhat of a BSer, and we certainly expected that he probably got a little more help from his dad than he indicated?
Well, I have to tell you, Scotty, I read the same article, and after I did, a bunch of things happened to me. First, I went out and joined the Communist Party of the United States.
Well, thank goodness for that.
I began to carry, believe her stickers and lawn signs, put them up everywhere. I began to hate my country with a fierce passion that I'd never, ever experienced before. And I started to realize that Michael Moore makes a lot of sense to me now. All of this fundamental change in my value system came about when I realized that Donald Trump used the tax code to his maximum advantage. That's the one thing that I could not simply deal with, Scotty. That's the straw that broke the whole philosophical camel's back to me. That he didn't voluntarily pay more taxes than the 80% or 70 or 60 or whatever he was paying at that rate in New York at the time. I'm not sure I could finish this segment, to be honest with you.
Let me just say, Bill, that the New York Times stipulates in the piece that many people take advantage of the tax code and get the maximum deductions wherever they can. However, the story also indicates that the Trump family, and basically all of this is driven by Fred Trump's desire to pass down his legacy to his children, that the Trump family went well beyond that. So the initial question was, okay, did everybody kind of expect that Donald Trump really didn't get just $1 million loan from his dad and parlay that into what he says, what President Trump says is a $10 billion fortune? But then the next step of it is, do we need to be concerned of what's turning up in tens of thousands of pages of documents, including tax filings and estate and gift tax filings? Not just that the Trump family tried to avoid taxation by legal means, but, for example, and I'll pick the most egregious example, they started a company called All County Supplies and Maintenance, if I remember correctly, and the company, its entire work was basically to take the supplies that Fred Trump was buying for his apartment buildings and other real estate around New York and mark it up and charge the marked up amount to the buildings that he owned. So that had a variety of benefits to it. Number one, it increased the tax deductions, but it also allowed the Trump family to go to the state of New York, because some of these buildings were rent-controlled buildings, many of them purchased with government-backed or government loans, to go to the state of New York and request a rent increase because of expenditures that he had made. But those expenditures were jacked up anywhere from 20 to 50% by this shell company that didn't do anything, apparently, according to the New York Times, but jack up those invoices. And the accusation is that Donald Trump's dad used that company as a way to pay salaries to his children, including Donald Trump himself, without paying the gift tax, which would have been burdensome.
So what you're saying is that Trump created a company to make running any kind of real estate deal in artificially rent-controlled Manhattan marginally profitable. Is that the argument?
Actually, it was hugely profitable if you were to take the account of the New York Times.
I was thinking, well, maybe, and then I heard rent control, and once I heard rent control, I just basically put the fork down, Scott. Rent control is the government's intrusion into the market. There are some people who are paying, I don't know what the numbers are, I just haven't got a clue. But there are people who are paying, a tenth or a fifth or half of what their neighbors are paying because they got grandfathered into this rent control agreement. The entire idea of rent control is like price control. And when you have price controls, you have black market. Now, if Donald Trump didn't do anything illegal, then that's just good business sense for me. And listen, you don't have to, this doesn't have to smell really particularly rosy. But if you're in a situation where the law in terms of rent control is so stacked against the market that you do something that I'm assuming was legal, if they consider it unethical, but if it was legal, in order to circumvent the artificial suppression of any kind of a market on the part of the city government, then I'm shocked. I'm simply shocked, and all of my support for him continues unabated.
Now, just to defend the New York Times, on several occasions during the course of this story, they mentioned what President Trump's attorney says, or I'm not sure if it was President Trump's personal attorney. It was a name I didn't recognize, or a White House attorney. Basically said, look, the Trump family conducted all of its business in accordance with the law.
Then period.
It was done by attorneys and CPAs who were, responsible for taking care of these kinds of issues. There were a couple of occasions where the IRS pushed back on, for example, another big deal in the story is property valuations, where the Trump organization would basically say, Fred Trump's organization, run by his children, would basically say, this building is worth $40 million, when it was really worth like $900 million. It's some huge multiple of it. And they, to avoid taxes, they would portray it as low in value, but then turn around a couple of years later and sell it for a huge multiple of what they said it was worth. So all that said, the Trump attorney says, we used legal means, we used CPAs and attorneys to vet all these things, and the IRS occasionally fined us, but there's nothing there. Do you think the New York Times is really on such a vendetta against President Trump that they're willing to not just, I'm not saying they're fabricating facts, but they're weaving together actual facts in a way that makes it look like he did something nefarious when in fact he's pure as the driven snow?
Is the New York Times out to get Donald Trump? Boy, that's a chin scratcher, Scotty. Which is why it gets the reply it gets from me. Once you said that no laws were broken, I just realized then what the hell's the point of the story here? What's the point of the story? If you make an IRS if you evaluate something, having been through a 3-year audit myself, which I'm sure was sheer coincidence, and I basically use my car just to drive to work and back. That's essentially all I do with my car. And like Matt Damon and every other single person in Hollywood and so on, I have a production company, and Car owns a production company. So we said that 80% of the mileage was direct to work because that's what we were able to justify. But the IRS said, no, well, we think you should be allowed 65%. So I had to write them a check for $1,200. And that is not criminal activity. That's a difference of opinion, which has been resolved. And I imagine the difference of opinion he had with the IRS was resolved. And the IRS wins these resolutions every single time because they have powers not granted to God, frankly. And so what are you saying here? You're saying that the New York Times is running a big story, a gigantic blockbuster about how Donald Trump used the Byzantine rules and structures of New York's infamous rent-controlled, camel trading bazaar. And he also basically took every available tax advantage that he possibly could because, he would like to pay maybe only pay 65% of what he makes instead of 80% of what he makes to these scoundrels and thieves. So I respect him more, actually, after this article. And when you say, is it something that the Times is out to get him with, I don't think there's a businessman in New York who's not doing what Donald Trump did. If you want to do an expose on how business works in New York and include Donald Trump's name, that's fine. But this is yet another example of what we've talked about before, Scott, and that is the sense that the left is going to uncover something a little unseemly about Donald Trump that's going to cause his supporters to start beginning wailing and gnashing of their teeth. The reason Donald Trump is president and the reason so many people support Donald Trump is because we tried with John McCain, and most especially we tried with Mitt Romney, who's probably the squeaky cleanest, candidate to run for office since George Washington. And he was a racist, and he was a misogynist, he was a homophobe, and he hated animals, puts his dog on the roof of his car. Okay, got it. I understand how you want to play this game now, and you want to play in the mud. You want to destroy a guy like Mitt Romney and make up all of these accusations. Whatever you think about Mitt Romney as a politician, I think his character is pretty well established. You want to destroy Mitt Romney's character and say that he, because of Bain Capital, he gave people cancer and all the rest of it. Got it. I understand. You won your re-election in 2012. You have set up the new rules. We're playing by the new rules. And it's very much like this whole Senate confirmation thing, Scott, where they would have needed, 61 votes before, right? Before they invoked what used to be called the nuclear option, but which I now call the Harry Reid option. Harry Reid needed one vote on some minor trivial thing. So he basically broke a gentleman's agreement that had been in place for 100 years. And okay, it's broken. Got it. This, what I'm not going to do, and what Trump's not going to do, and what I don't think any other Republicans or conservatives in this country are going to do anymore, especially after Kavanaugh, is to continue to play by the rules that we used to hold up as noble and honorable, when every single time we confront these people, they've utterly trashed them, utterly destroyed them. We can still have those rules, and we can still apply them to interactions and transactions between other honorable people. But when we're dealing with this kind of thing, I don't care. I don't care. I really don't care.
Well, if the New York Times...
Did I mention that I don't care?
If the New York Times has learned anything from James O'Keefe and the late Andrew Breitbart, it is that you can drip this kind of information out for a long time. And my guess is there will be more to come. And I can assure you that Bill Whittle will be talking about it right here on Bill Whittle Now, which is made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, who pay $9.95 a month, frankly, to spread this kind of commentary, these kinds of examples of the thinking of those on the right side of history around the world. If you are watching this on YouTube, make sure to click that little notification bell so you get an email every time a new episode comes out. We're cranking out a lot of content here. A new website is coming to BillWhittle.com. Exciting days are ahead. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.